Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I know it took people a little bit longer this morning to find their way through the maze getting into our building. I'm resigned to the fact that as this construction project moves along, that it's still going to get a little worse before it gets better, but when it gets better, it's going to be very, very nice. My pleasure is this morning to welcome you to our June Wednesday Wake Up Club breakfast. We live in interesting times. I noticed in this morning's paper, the Washington Times, which Helen and I were just commenting is, thank God, still publishing. Otherwise, we would be stuck with only the Washington Post in the morning, which I read after I have read the Washington Times in order to limit the amount of poison I ingest every morning. I can just skim through the Post after I have looked at the Times. But in any case, there's a story here about a lawsuit filed in Utah. It seems that in January of this year, a young lady got a Google map and wanted to know how to get where she was at one side of Park City to get to the other side, and she got the map and she set out walking at night and attempting to cross the street. In the middle of the night, she was struck and injured by an automobile, and she is suing Google for not warning her that there weren't adequate sidewalks or pathways there. There was a pathway, but it was covered with snow, and so she crossing the street got herself injured and had 6 weeks of rehabilitation. And one might worry about things like that, but fear not. We do know that President Obama will surely rein in the trial lawyers any day now. Any day now. Since 1979, the Leadership Institute has now trained 85,787 people, and of those, 3,565 we have trained already this year. You have before you at the tables a little yellow sheet listing our currently scheduled schools, and I urge you to consider attending one of these schools or sending a friend to them. The demand for our schools is truly phenomenal. Among the millions of newly activated conservatives in this country, thousands of them are coming to us because they have discovered that they owe it to their philosophy to study how to win. Now, my pleasure to introduce to you Jared Blair, who will come up here and offer an invocation and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Jared is an intern in our grassroots department. He is an undergraduate at Texas A&M, where he is cadet captain in the famous Corps of Cadets at Texas A&M. Jared, would you step up here?
Bow with me, please. Dear Lord in heaven, thank you for this day and for the opportunities that you've given us. Opportunities like earlier in the week to celebrate our servicemen. Opportunities like today to meet and discuss the affairs of our nation, where in some places this would not be allowed. Lord, watch over us as we go out from here and into our everyday lives, and let us all be examples and examples to others of what your will is. Lord, forgive us of our sins when we sin against you. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Stand, join me in the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Jared. And now Eric Slee will come up and give us a report on the Institute's programs. Eric is Director of Communications Training at the Leadership Institute, and he was previously a legislative correspondent for Congressman Mark Green of Wisconsin's 8th Congressional District, and Eric is a graduate of the University of Wisconsin at Oshkosh.
Thank you, Morton, and thank you all for being here this morning. You heard a little bit of good news from Morton about the total number of students trained so far this year. It's been a heck of a year, but I want to touch on one training that we have going on tomorrow all day in this room. So Morton here at the Leadership Institute and the staff here put a lot of stock in the next generation of conservative leaders, as you all well know. So it's vital to the success of this country for young conservative leaders when they come into this town to receive not only the training that they need to succeed, but also a feeling of purpose in their first job or at their internship. And the Leadership Institute Conservative Intern Workshop does exactly this. As one of the Institute's most well-trained or well-attended training, hundreds of interns from dozens of organizations every year attend, learning from LI faculty how to make the most of their time in DC, but also to meet possible future allies from all over the country and hear how LI can help them achieve their goals at every stage of their political career. We spend the day going over the 4 Ps of self-improvement, professional, political, personal, and philosophical, as well as review much of what intern coordinators should tell them when they start their internships, but either don't have the time or never get around to it. By the time they return to their host organizations, they are well prepared to maximize their internship for the organizations they work for, and get the most out of the internship for themselves. So I invite anyone here with interns to send them to our workshop tomorrow, where they'll join hundreds of other young conservative interns who will be learning how they can be successful leaders among their peers, and hopefully someday in the political process moving this country forward using the principles that we all in this room share and value. There's no cost for the training, and we'll even feed them, I think. For more information, please, they'll get some food, snacks, something. For more information, just contact Jane Gordon in our political training department, or you can find one of us, and we'll steer you towards someone that can help. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric. Of course we're going to feed those interns. We have to provide food, otherwise there wouldn't be any food left over for our interns to eat. It's now my pleasure to introduce to you Stephen Sutton, who will introduce our excellent speaker. Steve Sutton is our Vice President for Development and Campus Programs. Prior to joining the Institute, Steve served as Chief of Staff on Capitol Hill for over 14 years. He served as Chief of Staff for 4 different congressmen. Steve is a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy and has a Bachelor of Science degree in mechanical engineering. Steve?
Thank you, Morton. Sometimes when I'm introduced, people like to inform people I received my nomination to the Academy from Ted Kennedy as they try to embarrass me, but I think that's actually more of an embarrassment to Ted Kennedy than it is to me. I'm here this morning to introduce David Bossie to you all. I first met David, actually, and got to know him over 25 years ago when we were both, yeah, I know, when David was 3. When we were both young Republicans in the Washington, D.C. area. I from Virginia and David in Maryland. And occasionally our paths would cross at conferences and conventions and campaign work or other such things. At the time I was on active duty in the Navy, interested in getting more involved, and David was one of many people who suggested the Leadership Institute to me. They said, you gotta go to one of Morton's trainings, you gotta go to the Youth Leadership School. And I heard this constantly from Jenny Curtis Byler, Ellen Goldstein, Juanita Ballinger, David Bossie. That was kind of the crew back in the day. At the time, David was involved as a budding campaign operative, involved in several presidential campaigns in the 80s. In the 90s, he served as the chief investigator for the United States House of Representatives Committee on Government Reform and Oversight. During Bill Clinton's 2 terms as president, David led investigations ranging from Whitewater land deal to the transfer of dual-use technology to China, and to the foreign fundraising in the '96 Clinton re-election campaign. In between those stints in the '80s, in the late 1980s, many people don't know, David worked at the Leadership Institute. He was the director of Education and Communications here at the Leadership Institute from 1988 to 1989. Today, David is president of Citizens United and Citizens United Productions. And as president of Citizens United Productions, he's produced 12 documentaries since 2004, including Ronald Reagan, Rendezvous with Destiny, Broken Promises, The United Nations at 60, and a documentary about our troops in Iraq and their sacrifices they make to serve, entitled Perfect Valor. But perhaps his most famous documentary was Hillary the Movie. And that was the center of a landmark Supreme Court case, which I'm sure he'll speak to about this morning. If not, I'm sure there'll be questions about it. No, he'll talk about it. That Supreme Court case decided 5-4, Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission. Citizens United prevailed. And perhaps we'll also talk a little bit about what the left is doing to try and counteract that in legislation, which is just horrific, what they're proposing that's about to be voted on, I think, in the House in the next few weeks. So with that, David Bossie.
Well, thanks for that walk down memory lane. 25, I don't believe that for a second. I'm really honored to be here today. Thank you for the invitation, Morton. Helen, it's always good to see you. As Steve said, I worked here at the Leadership Institute, but more importantly than that, I got my training here. When I was just a youngster, which is when Morton likes to get his hooks into you, he teaches us about principle, and it's really something that you don't get every day. And so in 1984, I went through the Leadership Institute youth program to work on college campuses, and that's where I got bitten by the bug. And then I worked on the Reagan campaign in 1984, and then I became very involved in the college Republicans, and then I got a unique opportunity, a phenomenal opportunity, and worked with Morton on this, but I was Bob Dole's National Youth Director. He was one of the very few people in the 1987-1988 cycle that actually had a youth operation, and I was the National Youth Director. So I cut my teeth in youth politics and organizing, and that's one of the reasons that I ended up coming to work at LI. And those were the best underpinnings for any youngster in America, and so I'm proud to have that as part of my background, and I can tell you, anybody that I run into, whether it's 25 years ago or today, and by the way, I'll be sending a couple interns tomorrow if I can still do that. But I am one of the 85,000 that was trained here and really got my start here. So I thank Morton and Helen for that. To my topic today, I'm going to kind of jump around on a few things because I think it'll give you a little taste of what we're doing to try to combat the left. And then when we open it up for questions, I'm more than happy to expand on any of these areas. But in 2003, I was a party to the McConnell lawsuit, which was Senator McConnell's lawsuit to take on McCain-Feingold. And we were one of, golly, I think it was 60 or 65 plaintiffs. And we tried to have our, we tried to participate in the case, but when there's 65 plaintiffs, pretty much, one guy's making the decisions and you don't get a chance to participate very much. And unfortunately, we lost. And it stuck with me, and I didn't like losing, to be candid. And I didn't like losing on such an important, monumental, constitutional issue, which fundamentally, McCain-Feingold was about criminalizing political speech. No more, no less. And John McCain and Russ Feingold loved to run around Washington and around America and say this was going to drive evil money out of politics, when in fact it's exponentially grown, even under their monstrosity that the Federal Election Commission has created. And so all it has done is it's kept people, very much like everybody in this room, from participating. It was really an effort, McCain-Feingold, to really keep people from the process. And so in 2004, I saw what I thought was an opportunity. And in 2004, and I thank him every day for this, and that was Michael Moore. Michael Moore, the left-wing ideologue, a zealot, somebody who is, just opposed to everything that we stand for, showed me something, and that was the power of film, the power of documentary film. But more importantly, because I'm a political guy, more importantly was his ads for his movie were the best political ads of anybody during the Kerry campaign and the Bush campaign. Michael Moore's ads for his movie were more effective in defeat or trying to defeat Bush than anybody else's, no matter what they were doing. So I saw that and I said, wow, how come he doesn't have to follow the FEC rules? And my lawyers all said, wow, it's because he's made a movie and they may or may not have the media exemption. I said, all right, well, let's try that out. So we went and we made a film. I said, if he could do it, we could do it. And I called a bunch of people around town. You know how to make a movie? No, I don't know how to make a movie. You know how to make a movie? Yeah, I don't know how to make a movie. And literally there were exactly 2 conservatives in Hollywood that I called. Lionel Chetwynd, I don't know if anybody knows Lionel, but Lionel is a wonderful, highly Academy Award nominated for the Hanoi Hilton film that he made, that he wrote back in the 70s. Tremendous guy, a leader of this Friends of Abe group with Gary Sinise today, but was one of literally 2 people, and the other one was now my friend and now the late Ron Silver. And so I called the 2 of them, and they said, well, here's how Dave, I don't know how you could do it, but you better bring a checkbook. And I was like, all right, well, we'll give it a shot, because I really wanted to try it. I really wanted to see what would happen. So we made a film, and I got Charles Krauthammer and Fred Thompson and Fred Barnes and Bill Crystal and just a tremendous group of people to step forward and make a film literally in about 8 weeks. And we made a 90-minute film in 8 weeks. Now, it came out in October. I didn't have time to launch my legal effort because I went to the Federal Election Commission. I said, hey, can we do this? And they said, no, you can't do it. And I said, well, what do you mean we can't do it? I pointed over to Michael Moore and I said, how come, what's the 2 sets of rules here? And they said, well, we'll ask Mr. Moore what his intentions are, because it was right at the 60-day. One of the things we defeated in our landmark case was the 60-day window and 30-day window, which is being able to not being able to participate in the windows prior to elections, the general and the primaries. So the Federal Election Commission asked Michael Moore, hey, what's your intentions? Are you going to run these ads? And Michael Moore, in my opinion, that's where he made a mistake, was they didn't understand the rules, and he didn't have lawyers that understood campaign finance law. So they took their ads off the air and responded to the Federal Election Commission and said, we're going to take them off the air. So I won a huge victory. Ed Gillespie, the chairman of the RNC, called me up and said, thank you, because we were looking for every bit of help we could get that year, obviously. And taking those ads off the air was a big victory. But I still didn't solve my problem, because they told me I couldn't do it. So But that became my 5-year, what became a 5-year, almost 6-year odyssey because the Federal Election Commission did me a huge favor, which is what bureaucrats do. They laid out the case of what I hadn't done. And they said, because in a 9-page letter, because you haven't done all of these things like movie makers in Hollywood, meaning the left, does, we don't consider you a movie maker, we consider you a political organization. All right. Now that I know what the rules are, 5 years later, I went back to him and I said, please, sir, do you think I could have some more? You know, I said, how about now? 5 years later, we've made 14 films. What's your definition of a filmmaker? Now, that's more than Michael Moore's made in his whole career. So where are we now? And they said, no. And they also said, if you do what you're planning, which was to run ads, make a movie and run ads for them, because that's really what I wanted to do. I wanted to run TV commercials for the ads, because that's how you impact the American people. Very few people see the movie. Everybody sees the ads. So I said, all right, we're going to try this out. I had my lawyers go to the Federal Election Commission, and the Federal Election Commission told my lawyers, if your client does it, we'll consider it a willful violation. They had unwillful and willful. The unwillful was a civil fine, civil penalties. Willful, criminal. They said to me 5 years in prison for every count. And I said, I'm not going to be looking over my shoulder for you guys. I'm coming for you. And they all laugh. Yeah, you're just some guy, you don't know what you're doing. We'll take our chances. All right. I hired Ted Olson. And they had a complete change of attitude at that point because not only did we go after them, we dismantled them. We took them through a Supreme Court, which is now kind of, as you look back, we look at it and it's a remarkable thing that happened. We were taken, we were defeated at the lower court level, a 3-judge panel here in Washington, D.C., where we go to court. We have a day of a trial, in essence. It's a hearing, but you have witnesses and you present evidence. And weeks later, and it's an expedited review, of course. It only took me 2 years to get through it. Instead of maybe 4 or 5, that's expedited. So we worked through the system, and we lost the case, surprisingly. The 3-judge panel came back and said, no, you can't do this, but we really can't address this. Only the Supreme Court can. But all the media ridiculed our case. All the media, all the left said, oh, see, they don't know what they're doing. But we read the ruling completely differently. We read it as though it was an invitation to go to the Supreme Court. And so, and actually, Ted Olson was not my lawyer at the lower court level. I hired Ted when we got accepted to the Supreme Court, which was a few months later. And we had our briefing period, and we had an oral argument scheduled for March 2009. And we go to court. It's a big day. I've never been there. I'd never been in a room before, and it's an amazing experience. I urge everybody here to go sit in there if you can. It's open to the public. You go sit in there. It's really a remarkable experience, nothing like I had ever experienced. And I'd been on the floor of the U.S. Senate, on the floor of the House of Representatives, and I was blown away by it, just the entire way that they operate. However, so we go in there, and the Deputy Solicitor General, Elena Kagan, was the Solicitor General. And she had only been on the job literally days or weeks prior to our first oral argument. So she didn't make it because how could she? She wasn't ready. But the Deputy Solicitor General, Malcolm Stewart, who's a career deputy, the #1 campaign finance guy, he argues all campaign finance cases, came in there. And he's very good. He gets asked a question. Well, if the content of this movie was in book form, would it be the government's contention that the logical extension of the federal election law is that you could ban books. One word answer, yes. And man, you'd have thought, I mean, seriously, this was an amazing, all 9 justices were bothered by that. And I thought Scalia was going to come across the dais to get him. Because, I mean, they went berserk. They literally ate him alive. I've never seen vultures picking on a skeleton like that. I mean, it was, and he went back to his seat and he was just a defeated man. And we walked out of there and we said, wow, we might just win this thing. I might get, you know, when you're at the Supreme Court, you have these huge issues. I mean, bigger than any of us, I mean, that I can contemplate of the law and how they can have impact. But really, I had about 20 different little things I could win on. I only wanted to win one, really. I wanted to be able to say I won. I really just wanted to be able to say I won. And I didn't think, I was like, okay, I want to win the whole thing, but I'll take a little bit. I'll take a little victory because then I'll go back for another bite and another bite. So we had some confidence. And so we wait and we wait and we go through the months of waiting, And so June rolls around and everybody knows, as a Supreme Court watcher, knows you know, the Supreme Court goes out the last day of June. Everything they hear, they rule upon. So we're waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. Well, it gets down to the last couple days of June and we're like, wow, because the last days are always the most controversial rulings come out. And we're like, wow, maybe we're thinking to ourselves, wow, this is going to be fun. So now we're down to the last day, and it's our case and the firefighters' case, the New Haven firefighters' case, which was the then judge, now Justice Sotomayor's case, where they reversed her. And we were like, wow, and it was some arbitrary banking, I forget the ruling, but it was a banking issue. So there were 3 cases. They did the banking issue first. They did the New Haven case second, and we were like, what's going on here? Because we're sitting there in the courtroom. I was in the courtroom, and because I knew it was going to be that day, and the Chief Justice sits there and just, in Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission, we order a rehearing September 9th. Court's adjourned. We were like, what? I had to go, what did they just do to me? Because I don't know what that meant. I do know it's going to cost me a lot of money. I don't know what it meant, though. And it did. It cost a lot of money because it was literally, he ordered an enormous new round of briefings on completely different issues. And he actually gave a little bit longer statement than that, but it was only about 2 sentences, which was, we want briefings on Austin versus Michigan Chamber of Commerce and McConnell Section 203, which were the underpinnings, the entire underpinnings of McCain-Feingold and really what we were after. And I was dumbfounded. And Ted Olson came up to me and said, they're finished. We're going to beat them. And I was like, that was in June. So then we go through, now their summer break, all my lawyers who were going to Alaska, you know, Ted Olson's going to Alaska for a month, all gone. They're all whining at lunch about how they got to work all through the summer. And I just chuckled because, you know, I didn't have anything to do with it other than paying the bills when they came in. And so he says, well, we have the argument September 9th. So we literally July and August, we only had 2 months. So we had to have a very aggressive briefing schedule. So then all the amicus briefs come in, all the friend of the court briefs come in. And all of a sudden, the ACLU files one in my favor. The AFL-CIO files one in my favor. The committee for the, goodness gracious, the Reporters Committee on Freedom of the Press, Walter Cronkite's organization, files one in my favor, which made me had to wonder, am I doing the right thing? But, of course, the NRA and then Chamber of Commerce and every group that participates, like from the conservative side, also did. And we had, I think there was about 60 amicus, which the Supreme Court reflected on during their oral argument. But it was an amazing thing to go through. So we get to September. Now Elena Kagan is arguing her first case. Justice Sotomayor has her investiture on September 8th. So she's actually her first day on the court. Elena Kagan, it's her first argument, and not just at the Supreme Court, ever in any court anywhere in the country. And she's going up against Ted Olson and Floyd Abrams. Now, Floyd is brought into my case by Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell calls me up one day in the summer, I guess in June, maybe the day of the Supreme Court giving us a rehearing, and he says, "Dave, I want to participate in your case." I said, "Well, Senator, I appreciate the offer, but I'm going to have to say no." Now, Mitch McConnell's not a guy Morton knows that you say no to very easily. And I was concerned, to be candid, I'm a protector of my case. I've gotten it all the way, it was nothing against him, but I mean, I literally was very cautious at that stage. And he said, "Listen, we'll fully participate, Ted runs the show," and I was like, "I'm really concerned about it." And so they made a petition to the court. We got extended argument, which is a rarity. And we got an additional 10 minutes on each side because John McCain and Russ Feingold hired an attorney as well. So Elena Kagan argued for 30 minutes. John McCain's lawyer, who's a former Solicitor General, Seth Waxman, argued for 10 minutes. But they were going up against Ted Olson for 30 minutes, Floyd Abrams for 10. Floyd Abrams, the number one First Amendment lawyer in the country. Not necessarily a conservative, but a tremendous advocate. So I had the A team, and they had about a B- team because Elena Kagan, can you imagine the pressure? I had a twinge of just feeling bad for her, just for a split second, and it went away. And so, as she's finishing her oral arguments, and she's been getting demolished throughout the entire ordeal for 30 minutes, and she's trying to close up her case because the red lights come on, and as soon as the red light comes on, you're supposed to be done. I mean, it's a very rigid thing. She's trying to, the yellow light's on, they're about to turn red, and she's trying to get out of there. And she's kind of literally backing away from the podium, finishing up her answer, because that's what they do. And it was very, I was expecting it, when Justice Ginsburg, trying to be helpful, says, General, that's what they call her, I have no idea, Solicitor General, but they call her General. General, we back in March had this thing about banning books. What's the government, because they'd never asked her, they had been beating her up on the underpinnings of Austin, which was really the crucial elements of our case. But from a public relations standpoint, the book banning thing was a big deal, but nobody had asked it. And she's trying to help. She's trying to give her a softball to hit out of the park to be able to close down the issue so that when the 9 of them walk back in the conference room, there's nobody saying, well, see, they want to ban books. And instead she said, well, we really don't agree with the rationale anymore. However, there is a statute on the books that does allow it. And Scalia, I think, went, well, what do you mean by that? And she said, well, there's a statute on the books that allows us to prosecute, but she literally says, but trust us, we've never prosecuted anyone in 60 years. To which the Chief Justice, I thought he was going to break the dais with his elbow, he leans across there and he says, we don't put our First Amendment rights in the hands of FEC bureaucrats. And she melted. Because how could you not? The lightning bolts from his eyes just lit her up. And that was and thank God for Justice Ginsburg, because she did us a huge favor. So the chief says, well, let me get into that a little bit. If there's 5, now the red light's on, you're supposed to sit down. But when the chiefs talk, when the justices are talking, you don't sit down. And for 10 minutes, they lit her up on banning books. And so the chief says, now, let's just say it's a 500-page book, one paragraph on one page says vote for or vote against. She said, yeah, that would fall under the definition. Well, let me ask you about pamphleteering, because basically America was founded on pamphlets. So, oh yes, pamphlets, definitely. That's classic electioneering. We could ban those. You can do what? We can ban political speech in this country, is what you're saying. Absolutely. All right. And that is what our case was all about. We didn't go at this case so that IBM or Microsoft, which is what the press is making it all into, you know, they call it the NASCARing of politics. The Saturday Night Live did a skit on our case where they had a politician out there, and it had, you know, like a NASCAR has the little patches of each logo on them. So they had, you know, they had a Mobil Exxon tie, and they had an IBM patch here. It was very funny. Had nothing to do with what we did it for. The left, the mainstream media, loves to make it all about buying, you know, the end of democracy, the corporate takeover of politics. When in fact, there's been exactly one corporate expenditure in one campaign, and that was in a state representative race in Texas, where a mom and pop, I think it was an architect, ran an ad against a guy who was a Democrat, changed parties to run as a Republican, and he said, vote for a real Republican, vote for a real conservative, vote for Bill Smith or whatever, and he paid for it with corporate funds because he could. And that is what the mainstream media doesn't report, but that's literally since January 21st. Now we're in June. There's been no corporate expenditures. So they can't point to any. Now we get to Elena Kagan, and this is her only Achilles heel, is the First Amendment. Personally, I think that the Senate is, you know, obviously has 59 votes. They're weak. They're going to confirm her. But we do have some senators who are going to grill her on the First Amendment, and that is important. And it's kind of funny because now we have the Citizens United litmus test for, Obama called it a litmus test for Elena Kagan, the First Amendment, or the Citizens United case. And then, of course, there's the Disclose Act, which is the Citizens United legislative response in Congress. By the way, there's several different constitutional amendments in the House and Senate brought forward by the crazies like Donna Edwards in Maryland and even Chuck Schumer. You know, but the Disclose Act, which is brought forward by Chris Van Hollen and Chuck Schumer, kind of coincidentally the two heads of the Democratic committees, I might add, the Congressional Committee and former Senatorial Committee Chairman, is now trying to, in an election year, force through the Disclose Act, which is basically a way to shut down conservative organizations, carves out unions, and doesn't do anything to affect corporate giving or corporate participation. Virtually nothing. It solely is focused on conservative groups. It really is a piece of legislation aimed at the United States Chamber of Commerce and with all of us kind of behind. So it's really a remarkable, brazen, incumbent protection plan that they have in mind. I got, as Citizens United, I got a chance, I was invited and I testified before Congress a few weeks ago on it. I have met with Senator Bennett, who is the ranking senator on the Rules Committee, and he is going to do his utmost to defeat it when it gets over to the Senate, if they even move it through committee. They may Rule 14 it, which is a way to bring it straight to the floor once the House votes on it. So we'll see what happens. But it is a remarkable thing to have the President of the United States, when I'm sitting at home during the State of the Union, and I mean, it was a surreal experience, as you can imagine. I'm sitting at home, and my wife's wondering why I'm watching the State of the Union, why I'm watching this guy. We all know the State of the Union, unfortunately. And, and so I'm watching him, and then all of a sudden he attacks our case. During the State of the Union, it was and he did us an enormous favor. I mean, he put it up there. I was like, God, I'm going to have to send him a Christmas card. and thank him for it. And then, of course, you have the Justice Alito response, the non-response response, which was that's not true, simply not true, that he mouths as a visceral reaction to somebody who just lied about you and fabricated the entire thing. Because what Barack Obama said, and this isn't going to be a surprise to anybody in this room, was incorrect on his legal analysis of what the case did. So that's where we are legally, and just a quick minute, and then I'll take questions because I've probably gone long. Is that we're making films. We have an enormous movie studio in Washington on Capitol Hill. We have Sean Hannity just had me on an hour special. I was the only guest, along with my writer, Steve Bannon, and called on our film called Generation Zero, which is our economic film, and it's our social, economic, and cultural reasons for the 40 or 50 year decline of how we got to September 18th and to that crisis that day. And it is a tremendous film, has a phenomenal cast in it. Victor Davis Hanson, Shelby Steele, Lou Dobbs, Tobin Smith from Fox, you name it, Dick Morris, Newt Gingrich. It is a phenomenal film. I highly recommend it to all of you. Actually, Morton, if somebody sends me a list, we'll just send DVDs to everybody here today of that film. It's a great film. And Sean Hannity watched it. Roger Ailes watched it, and he made everybody at Fox watch it in the screening room at Fox. It was a really awesome thing to have happen. They really enjoyed the film. They've kind of adopted it as their own. And so Sean we did this hour-long special, and they never re-air things. And they've shown it now they showed it on Sunday again for the 8th time. Really, over just in the last 10 weeks. I mean, just a phenomenal response. And now Newt Gingrich and I have a new film out just a couple of weeks ago called 9 Days That Changed the World. As Stephen mentioned, I made a film called Ronald Reagan Rendezvous with Destiny. And it really is a wonderful film on President Reagan and his life and his legacy to the conservative movement. But I made that film as the first of a 3-part series. First on President Reagan, second on Pope John Paul II, and the third one we're in production on now for next year is on Lady Thatcher. Because I believe the history books and the way we're being taught history, the revisionists out there, and there's an entire generation that don't even know the Berlin Wall existed. So we felt those were important. And actually, Newt and I leave Sunday. Newt Gingrich and I are going to Poland to show the film, our 9 days film on Pope John Paul II in Krakow and Warsaw over a few days. And then we head to Rome, and we're showing it at the Vatican. And we're really excited, and Newt thinks this is our best work. Actually, he thinks it's the best work of his life, he told me. And it is a wonderful thing to be able to work with him. So and so those are our 2 films out right now. We have 3 films in the works. One, I have a film, working title, Saving America with Dick Morris. And that film will be out the first week of September. And that's his new book that he has out right now. We're basically taking how to defeat the socialist agenda of Barack Obama. And that's Dick Morris is hosting that one. We have a film, another film with Newt Gingrich that'll be out as well in September on the War on Terror. And really, it's a focus not just on abroad, but here at home. The homegrown, the Fort Hoods, the Lackawanna Six, the internet, the right here in Northern Virginia. All of the mosques that are part of the problem, not part of the solution. And so that's a terrific film. And then one that I'm really proud of that's going to be out in September as well is a conservative women in the Tea Party movement, in effect. So we have Michelle Bachmann, the wonderful and incredibly intelligent congresswoman from Minnesota, is hosting and narrating that film. But we have Sarah Palin and Michelle Malkin and Gene Schmidt from Ohio, and Phyllis Schlafly, and just some of the wonderful, because we were doing an analysis of our Generation Zero film. This is kind of a secondary film, but to that is we went from the 80s to from the soccer moms to September 11th, where you had the security moms, these big voter blocks that people like to triangulate on. And so now we feel that there's the checkbook moms. That the checkbook mom is the mom who is going to be the kind of the filling in the sandwich. You're going to be taking care of your parents on one hand, and potentially having your kids, unfortunately, in your house up until they're 25 or 30. Because they're going to be they're the ones dealing in the business world, trying to get their kids educated, trying to keep the families together, and trying to really rebuild an economy all at the same time. So so that's Michelle Bachmann's film, and we're really proud of that one. That one's going to be out in September as well. All three out in September, all three so that I can advertise them to help influence people's impressions before they go to the polls. So I appreciate the time. I'm happy to take questions if we still have time, Stephen. Sure. Morton?
Absolutely. Let's take some questions. Let me ask one first.
Yes, sir.
How do you fund all this?
Well, difficultly, in a word. Citizens United, we have a 501c4, which is Citizens United, and we have a 501c3 Citizens United Foundation. And they've been around now since, 1988. Citizens United was founded in 1992. Citizens United Foundation was established. And so we have a very large group of people, and our average gift is about $50. And we have between 500,000 and 600,000 supporters across the country. And so we're very blessed, but as you know, it is a tough business. And it is one of these businesses that you have to go out and it's not what you do for me yesterday. It's what are you doing tomorrow and the next day. And so we have a vision, and that's why we felt these films were a way for us to define ourselves. But we have some tremendous supporters, but we always need more, and that's a fundamental reality. So people we have donors. I think we have 4 couples going with Newton Ida. Poland and Rome this week, so we have unique opportunities for folks who work with us. So we're really blessed.
Okay, other question.
Yes, sir.
While you're in crowd.
I can hear you. Yeah, we've been there. We shot the film in Auschwitz, part of the film in Auschwitz. Yeah.
Bush 43 signed the McCain-Feingold Act. I believe rumors that he said, well, the courts will handle it.
That's right.
Obviously, great expense. Is there, at the level you work at, have people figured out that you just can't depend on the courts to do the right thing?
Sure. Look, we feel George. That was one of President Bush's major mistakes in his presidency. And to be candid, there are a lot of smart people in that White House, but I think they were a little too cute by half on that one. They thought, oh, well, we'll sign it. We'll get the PR value of signing it. And to be candid, I hold Carl and others responsible for that. It was a bad decision, and it cost my organization. We spent just under $2 million to get this result. And I was able to, it's actually, if it wasn't so painful, it would be funny. But I raised exactly $10,000 to be able to fund the case. Because to be candid, there's no sex appeal to fighting a McCann. Nobody even knows what it is. It's a very difficult thing to explain to somebody, and we didn't raise much money at all, unfortunately. But we paid for it out of the general treasury, and it was the right thing to do.
And thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Did you have a question back there? Oh, yes, sir. Where you guys can get DVDs. Citizensunited.org, www.citizensunited.org is our website. It has all 14 of our current films there that you can take a look at and order right there. We also, each film has its own website. So if you go to Citizens United and click on a movie, it'll take you to the movie website, and you'll be able to watch the trailer, read about the cast, read about the movie, and we have usually TV commercials. You can watch 30-second clips, 1-minute trailers, that type of thing, and get a real feel for the type of films that we're making and the quality of the films, because we make everything in high definition. We edit everything in high definition. We have almost every single one of our films now has original composition, so we hire composers to write music to the movie. It really adds an element to the film that's very important. It's expensive and time-consuming, but it's really worth it. Yes, sir.
About the scheduling of when you put these in theaters and when you put them in DVDs. I assume you follow the same schedule that the mainstream Hollywood does of, give the theaters a chance first. Question that comes to mind there is a lot of those theaters are owned by the big Hollywood movie studios, and I imagine you run into roadblocks there. And if the Schumer bill, whatever you want to call it, it gets to the high court and it's unsettled, or if it goes against you, I mean, are you willing to take this to the extent that if it comes to that, you will show that thing right up to the time that federal agents literally come into the theater and try to shut it down?
Short answer is yes. I mean, look, when my lawyers came and told me the 5-year per count, I told my wife that, and she said, "Well, maybe you want to give that a try, see what happens." Just kidding. She's also an LI grad, by the way. She's just kidding, of course. But we're look. What we are dedicated to fight. We fought and we won. Okay, it's the old adage. I took the same that Reagan did, which was, with the Soviets, which is I win, you lose. And that is, you can't go halfway. You can't be a little bit pregnant. You're all the way. And so with this current legislation, we're going to fight them at every turn. I'm out talking to members of Congress, trying to defeat it in the House. I testified before the House committee just a few weeks ago. I will fight this at every turn. If it passes the House, we'll fight it in the Senate. Right now, and that's why I met with Senator Bennett a couple of days ago, Senator Bennett, who was just defeated in Utah in his primary, is a tremendous patriot on the First Amendment, and has been. And he actually watched my flank on the Whitewater Committee back in the 90s, and was always a great conservative. And to have him beaten in a primary was a shocking thing. I mean, I think his lifetime ACU rating was like 87. It's kind of surprising. But I went and met with him, and he said, our biggest concern is Olympia Snow. I have gone and met with Olympia privately, and she has committed to me to stay with us, which will give us 41. And if we have 41, they could pass it in the House all they want. They won't get it through the Senate. Now, if she peels off, we'll have to deal with it at that time. But, we will litigate it once we get there. I mean, we'll take it one step at a time. If we can defeat it, in the next 60 days, because that's really what it comes down to. We have to defeat it between now and when they go out. If we defeat it over the next 60 days, whether it's in the House or in the Senate, it will never happen, because November is going to happen. Oh, I'm sorry. To go to your first part of your question, you know, it's funny. The conservatives are not welcome in the filmmaking business when it comes to theatrical releases. I mean, unless you're a big money, unless you have $40 or $50 million to put up, and I have two nickels to rub together, so I'm not in that position. But we do have our films in theaters. What we do is we do a limited theatrical release. Generation Zero right now is going to be in theaters in September. We were going to put it in over this summer. We were going to put it in actually later this month, but we decided to wait till September so that I could advertise the film in September as people were paying attention to what they were going to do in November. And so we were trying to have a big impact there because then all the different people who have promised to do big things on their shows, like Glenn Beck and others, will then have an opportunity to have us on as guests to discuss these films in September and October. So unless you have the money, you can't do it. And the other thing that we've done is, instead of, which we just did this, we now have 2 films this way out of 14, so we're just getting started with this, is we're starting them as for-profit, a specific film as a for-profit, as opposed to as opposed to just a part of the nonprofit. We start an LLC for the film, so that if the film is able to make, so if donors want to be investors instead of donors, there's a tax benefit if it has a loss, but it's also, if it makes money, there's money to be shared. So we've tried to build vehicles for people to fully participate that benefit them. So the answer is, we're not in theaters as much as we want to be. We will be over time. Yes, ma'am.
One more question.
And it's Helen's.
Recount.
You said that when you started out that there were only 2 conservative filmmakers in Hollywood, and one of those is dead now. And I'm wondering, is it any better now?
It is. It's not wonderful, but it's better. Lionel Chetwynd had started this group called the Friends of Abe long ago, back probably 5-10 years ago. And once and a few years ago, he got a guy named Gary Sinise involved. And Gary Sinise is obviously a big TV actor, been in a lot of movies, very highly visible. And the 2 of them started this, they got John Voight involved, and all of a sudden they got this Friends of Abe organization. And now they probably, and I'm a member, I've been a member a few years, and I go out to the events in Hollywood. Gary Sinise actually is for the 3rd time hosting one of my movie premieres in L.A. So Gary, works closely with us, and it's nice to have an outlet in Hollywood so that we can market our films, but it's also a talent pool for us. We're able to find good directors, producers, and production staff, editors, through that group. Mostly composers, actually. There's a tremendous amount of conservative composers out there, which you never kind of put that together, but it's a wonderful thing to find. So it is getting better. Gary Sinise and his group, the John Voights of the world, are coming out of the closet, so to speak. And so I think that, over the years, I think, Barack Obama's helping us there as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. That was great. David, I want to thank you so much. This was a memorable breakfast, and we will all remember it and the remarkable things that you said. One of the remarkable things that you said is something that I can assure you that in 38 years of marriage I have never said, and that is, tell Helen only one more question. Dave, in a token of our appreciation, let me present you with one of our newest model Adam Smith ties, the one I am wearing here.
Thank you very much,
Thank you,
sir.
my friend.
Appreciate it.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you can imagine the satisfaction that I got from hearing this fellow who we trained a long time ago, who worked with us on our work with us on our staff. As you get older, the age things don't matter as much. It's only when you're young as you are that aging is an issue. For folks like me, it doesn't matter that much. I wish to invite all of you back here on Wednesday, July 7th. Our next Wednesday Wake Up Club breakfast will feature Jonah Goldberg, who is the editor of National Review Online, and many of you have read or seen or heard Jonah. That will be an interesting presentation. If any of you are interested in a tour of the Leadership Institute building, I'd urge you to meet Seth Nichols up here. Seth, where are you? He'll be here and available to take any of you for a tour of the building, and he may even be able to give you a summary of what's going on in the construction project. A lot of action still afoot there. Thank you all for coming.